Hey everyone, welcome to our educational series here at Future Tech. We like to take a particular topic, break it down, and give everybody a 10,000-foot view of the world. On this episode, we have our Senior Director of Technical Solutions, Eric Dalton, on to discuss private LTE and what spectrum might be available for somebody to use. Eric, maybe you could introduce yourself, let folks know kind of your role here at Future Tech, and how that pertains to this private LTE discussion we're going to have today.
Absolutely. So appreciate that, John. So good afternoon, folks. Name is Eric Dalton. I'm the Senior Director of Technical Solutions within Future Tech, and my primary role from day to day is literally working with our sales organization from a pre-sales technical perspective to understand what our customers' problems are so that we can come up with solutions that can solve those problems. So from my perspective, again, I kind of work more in a pre-sales role within Future Tech. And then once we understand and we can articulate what the use cases are and what the problem is that needs to be solved, I'll then work with our engineering team internally to come up with the right solution based on the ask, and then kind of lead them down the process of fully deploying a full solution to our customers. So the topic today around private LTE is a fantastic one. We get that question in particular a lot, and look forward to having kind of a deeper discussion today on how we can bring some of our best of breed technology from the different vendors that we support today to the customers out there to solve their problems.
Thanks, Eric. And obviously you don't have an easy job. But do you think you could give us just an overview of private LTE? Because I think there's just to have that description would be good, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, so at its very basic nature, private LTE is made up of, I guess, four different hardware components. And depending on the use case and the situation, they kind of blend together. But at a minimum, you need what's called an EPC core, which ends up being the brains and intelligence for a private LTE system. Typically, you would need some type of transport network to be able to have communication from wherever that private EPC core is sitting to the radio access network, the RAN. The mobile network side, again, is the radio access technology. That's the E-Node Bs, as they're referred to within the private network. And then eventually you communicate with end user devices, the UEs, at the base level. And the UEs, for most people reference, typically are like cell phones or things along those lines. But depending on what that use case is, there's a variety of different UEs that are out there to solve different problems. The one part that a lot of people don't put a lot of thought into is really the spectrum side. And when you're deploying a private LTE using cellular-based technology, that spectrum piece ends up being extremely important and is a requirement, obviously, in order for you to deploy a private LTE network in general.
So obviously there's some, spectrum is a big piece of this. Do you think, and I've had customers ask, a lot of questions around this. Can we maybe take a little bit deeper dive into what's available for a customer?
Absolutely. So when it comes to the spectrum piece in particular, a lot of people, when they think about cellular-based technology, they think about the carriers of the world, right? And the carriers have, low band and mid band spectrum typically that they have been spending, millions and billions of dollars on over a lifetime. The US actually did something a little bit forward thinking that became available in March of 2020, where they basically took a block of mid spectrum from 3550 to 3700 megahertz, so kind of right in that mid band range, and they opened it up as a cellular based technology that the private industry could actually use for deploying their own private cellular network. So they articulated out to be CBRS. The CBRS spectrum by the FCC ended up being a very popular spectrum because it was the first time that you actually had a cellular-based 3GPP certified spectrum that could be used by private entity to deploy. So it was, again, a very forward-thinking approach. And the US put some rules about that, and we can talk about that in a second. But the CBRS spectrum in the US in particular ends up becoming, quote unquote, shared spectrum that can be used, if you will, by private entity to deploy, where you don't have to be a carrier in order to deploy a private cellular network.
So you said shared spectrum. Is this not like other things where I purchase a license and I just own this? Can you elaborate a little bit on that shared spectrum
Absolutely.
piece?
Yep. So fantastic question. So CBRS, from an FCC perspective, they kind of articulated out that 150 megahertz of mid-band spectrum, and they have a what's called a spectrum allocation server, a SAS server that's responsible for basically any customer or any device that would like spectrum. It's got to interact with this SAS database, the spectrum allocation server, to get spectrum grants in order to deploy. So it's not necessarily quote unquote free spectrum. It's called shared spectrum in the fact that requests get sent to the SAS. The SAS then responds based on a tiering approach to give you access to that spectrum. So the way the definition of CBRS from a subscription side came out is the FCC kind of designated three different tiers within that CBRS spectrum that can be used. And the three tiers, as kind of highlighted on the slide in front of you from a pyramid perspective, tier one at the top ends up being the incumbents. So anyone like U.S. military that have radars or fixed satellite stations, they are considered the incumbents. They've been using that spectrum longer than anyone else. And the FCC wanted to make sure that anyone that's a tier one incumbent has access to the spectrum wherever they are at any given point. So they're considered top of the pyramid. They're tier one. They get it wherever they want. Where they don't exist, the FCC then kind of carved up two different tier models below that for general private networks to be able to be deployed. Those two tiers, tier two is called priority access license, tier three is called GAA, or general authorized access. The tier two model is called priority access license, where the FCC actually held an auction and allowed private entity to buy 10 megahertz chunks of spectrum in county-wide locations across the US so that people can quote unquote own their own spectrum in those areas based on what they purchased. So a PAL action again was hosted by the FCC. People purchased, if you will, 10 megahertz chunks or multiple thereof within different counties in order for them to deploy against. If you don't have a PAL license or didn't participate in that auction, that's okay, because at the bottom of the pyramid, it's called General Authorized Access, or GAA license. So basically, anyone who's not an incumbent and also doesn't have priority access license, all of that spectrum on a per geographical location basis ends up getting access in that GAA tier. So anyone and everyone has the ability, providing that there's not a tier above them that's using the licenses, can use that GAA spectrum to deploy their own private networking. And the FCC also put some rules in about how many PALs can exist in a different area and things like that, which basically indicates that every single geographical location across the US does have GAA spectrum available everywhere. So everyone can still deploy even if they don't have a PAL license. So based on this tiered approach, private operators can now use either a combination of PAL licenses. If you don't have one, you could sublet from someone else, or just use your GAA spectrum to deploy your own private network.
All right, that makes sense. And thanks for breaking that down. So I have one last question, and then I'll let you off the hot seat. Um, if a customer's thinking about investigating, private LTE, CBRS, what would be some of those next steps? And sometimes people really, really like to see, seeing is believing. I'd like to see some of this stuff and benchmark it, right? So what are the next steps, and like, are there places to be able to do that benchmarking?
Yep, good, great question, and I mean a great segue into future tech in particular. I mean, what I would recommend is anyone who's looking to deploy any type of private networking in general, do your research and then consult the experts, if you will, in your industry that can help you out with that. With future tech obviously being one of them. From a future tech perspective in particular, we've got different vendor relationships with best of breed technology for private networking across the board. And typically, our approach has always been from a design side. We're not going in and saying, oh, it's got to be private cellular, or oh, it's got to be this. What we like to do is talk to our customers, evaluate what the use case is, understand what the problem statement is, and then we can direct them towards a private network that fits their needs versus literally just going in with kind of one approach. We've got all kinds of different technology from, transparent bridges on the layer 2 side, all the way up to private 5G networks on the high side and everywhere in between. So, we do consider ourselves kind of an industry expert when it comes to, deploying private networking, and we would welcome the opportunity to talk to customers. And based on that as well, one of the things that we actually created was an innovation center, which is just outside of our headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. And inside the innovation center in particular, our thought focus there was literally to enable private networking and different types of private networking in a open warehouse space, so that if people wanted to come in and look at private 4G or 5G or Wi-Fi 6 or some of the interesting teragraph technology that's out there, we have that actually demonstrated live, as well as different use cases enabled within the innovation center to be able to show customers not only kind of an end-to-end architecture from a technology perspective like Private LTE, but also to show them the integration of different use cases on top of that technology. So it's been very popular. We offer, demos and kind of walkthroughs of our innovation center. And in a good old COVID world, we also offer virtual walkthroughs of that center for people that are looking to, sit at home, but kind of still see some of the technology that we've enabled within the center. So it's been, a very positive thing. We've gotten a lot of positive feedbacks from a lot of our different customers, and it really strikes a chord when people can actually see real stuff versus the slideware that a lot of people demonstrate.
That's great, Eric. I have to thank you. I know you're a busy person. I appreciate you joining me today. I definitely got a lot out of it. I hope that our viewers got a lot out of it. If you'd like to research CBRS, Eric Dalton actually wrote a technical white paper on CBRS. This is available in the description below. This is a great place to start. And until next time, stay classy, America. And we look forward to the next series.
Thanks, folks.